Welcome to Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio news magazine put together by the Virginia Institute for Public Policy so that you go into your day fully armed with factual background on so many of the stories that are sometimes front of mind, sometimes a little bit more esoteric, but nonetheless substantive to getting on with our getting on here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Our first guest this week joins us from Freedom Works. She's their director of regulatory action, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things bubbling through, and I use that phrase intentionally, the General Assembly, a man who is the reason I am your host here on Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the Honorable Ken Cuccinelli. Good morning, Ken. Welcome to the program. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing all right, Joe. Good to talk to you.
So, so much, and Dominion is without question one of those low-hanging fruits, but Lee Ware has a bill that's going through. It's HB 1718 regarding fuel cost recovery. And I know that on a deep substantive level, we can talk about better ways to get electric utilities or electricity distributed through the area. But give us an overview over the fuel cost recoveries and what this bill would do with Dominion.
Yeah, the way electricity prices are set for all of the captive electricity ratepayers in Virginia, 2/3 of whom are Dominion customers, are a series of hearings before the State Corporation Commission, all affected by what the General Assembly directs the SCC to do. And in recent years, the General Assembly has been directing the SCC to keep elevated electricity rates at Dominion's request, and that hasn't helped the rest of us. But one of the types of hearings is this fuel recovery hearing. And your listeners will no doubt have been hearing occasionally about the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, but it isn't the only pipeline in Virginia. It isn't the only possible pipeline in Virginia, but it's the big news lately. And what Lee Ware's bill does is to make sure the State Corporation Commission can apply basic free market consumer protection to things like the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. And it's rather obvious the Atlantic Coast Pipeline isn't itself a fuel. It carries fuel. But Dominion is using its ratepayers to finance their non-regulated business investing in that pipeline. So, which is kind of unfair to all the other pipeline companies. They don't have a bank of captive ratepayers they can go tap for this money.
Right, and without choice of, I don't feel like using them anymore. Like a cell phone company, you could say, I'm not really happy with U.S. Cellular or whoever it is. I'm going to change. You can't just do that in electricity business.
You will enjoy yourself.
Talk about how Dominion, I'm going to take a little tangent and we'll come back to the crux of the bill, but you mentioned that Dominion has these sort of different entities. Some are regulated, some are not. Is that the having the cake and eating it too proviso of the electric utility construct?
It certainly is in the case of the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. So I'll give you an example. So Dominion's holding company owns the electric utility in Virginia, VEPCO, Virginia Electric Power Company. We all normally refer to it as Dominion, but it's actually only one Dominion company. As Wall Street calls it, it is Dominion's cash cow.
Yes, because there are Dominion
that's their
Energy.
Perspective.
There's Dominion in West Virginia. I think in Ohio. There are Dominion Energy, in North Carolina.
Yeah, they're in a number of states. Yeah. Yes, they are in a number of states with different subsidiaries. Well, one of their newest subsidiaries is one of the partners to build the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. And the way the pipeline got approved at the federal level, where they got permission to build it, was by showing that they had sold 90% of the capacity the pipeline could carry. And so the only thing the FERC did is say, well, you have 90% of it contracted. It must be needed so you can build it. And what that means is now they can use eminent domain, and there's nothing the Commonwealth of Virginia can do to stop this.
But it's that this 90%.
They can use eminent domain to go build the pipeline. The only thing that Virginia can do is decide who pays for it. Do ratepayers pay for it and carry the risk of cost overruns, which, of course, we all know are coming?
Yeah.
or do shareholders pay for it and absorb the risk of cost overruns?
Which in a private company, any infrastructural build out of a private company, that would be how it's done.
Yeah, that's how a normal business operates. That's how 99.999% of all businesses in America work. I mean, if you're Columbia Gas and you own and run pipelines and build pipelines, of course, you don't have these captive ratepayers to serve as a bank that you can just go tap because you're politically influential with the legislature and make them pay for your projects that you get a 15% return on. Hey, that's a good deal if you can get it, huh?
Oh, yeah.
It's no wonder Wall Street loves Dominion. And here we have a situation where you talk about having your cake and eating it too. So Dominion's Atlantic Coast Pipeline subsidiary contracted with Dominion's VEPCO subsidiary to buy the capacity for the pipeline.
So they're that 90% is their own usage.
No, 90%. There are three different joint venture partners, Southern Energy, Duke, or others, and they all did the same things in their service territory.
Uh-huh.
Now, Dominion owns 48% of the pipeline, but they own 20% of the capacity, and they contracted with VEPCO for that sale. But here's the, quote, funny, unquote thing. Only two of their natural gas plants connect to the pipeline or will connect to the proposed pipeline. They don't need this gas. And those two gas plants already, by Dominion's own testimony before the State Corporation Commission, already have enough gas. They don't need expanded capacity heading out into the future to function at full power. So there are other things Dominion can do with this gas and undoubtedly intends to do, including turn it into liquid natural gas and sell it into the European market, which I'm fine with. But what I'm not fine with, and what Delegate Lee Ware is clearly not fine with, is letting them force ratepayers to pay for this project of theirs. And Delegate Lee Ware's HB 1718 doesn't determine the outcome of a State Corporation Commission hearing, but it does give them more power to determine if the pipeline is needed. And if it is not, then they can't saddle ratepayers with the price for it. I would say there is a bit of a loophole in our system. Right now, the anticipated cost for Dominion ratepayers would be $2.5 billion over 20 years for this project. And that's about $75 per household per year for 20 years. And it's very clear that there isn't going to be any benefit to Dominion's Virginia ratepayers. And it'd be one thing if you're paying $75 a year to get more power, to get cheaper gas or something. But they're not getting any of that.
Well, and that's been the sales pitch, though, Ken, is that this will lower or keep the price of the electricity down. But if only two plants are even connecting to it, where is it going to Duke Energy? Is it going to other ratepayers? Because that seemed to be the defense of it, was that the pipeline would keep the electricity prices down, and
it'll keep electricity prices lower in Europe. But it won't keep electricity prices lower in Virginia. Now, I have no problem with Dominion selling gas into the European market, but I do have a problem with them making Virginians pay for that. And so does Lee Ware, and that's why he's put this bill in. Again, this is just basic free market consumer protection. That's all it is. And we have a regulated electricity market. And the point of the regulator, the State Corporation Commission, is to try to imitate free market pricing principles as much as possible. And as you know, you've covered other bills since 2015 in particular, where Dominion has gotten literally hundreds of millions of dollars a year simply legislatively shifted from ratepayers to Dominion. They right now have acknowledgedly elevated electricity prices that they're charging to their customers, and they're making hundreds of millions of windfall profits a year just because of their political influence. And this is an attempt to head that off at the pass and make sure the SEC can actually make a clean, honest decision about the Atlantic Coast Pipeline costs.
Ken Cuccinelli is on with us from FreedomWorks talking about a bill that contact your legislator. Israel O'Quinn is the chairman of the House Commerce and Labor Subcommittee that's got this bill right now. Delegate Hugo, Delegate Byron, some good folks on this, Delegate Kilgore, that need to hear from you, and in general, if it comes to the floor as well. But I think a lot of our listeners can.
Well, and the Democrats on that committee. I mean, it can't pass without Republican support. But folks who live in Democrat districts should call their Democrat delegates as well. But you're right. Tim Hugo needs to support this. I'll be talking to Delegate Kathy Byron very soon about it. And Tony Wilt and David Yancey are key folks. Yancey's on the committee. Tony Wilt is on the subcommittee. So they're all very important. Michael Wiebert, and I hope your listeners will give them a call, as well as Israel O'Quinn and Terry Kilgore, who are chairman of the subcommittee and the full committee, respectively.
Well, and let's go to, though, one of the, I think, misconceptions. A lot of listeners would then say, well, hold it, isn't Dominion regulated by the state? But it seems like, as you said in the kind of the preamble of this, Ken, is that Dominion has broken itself off into portions that become extra regulatory or are not under the purview of the Commonwealth's oversight, and I think that's where I think a lot of people would say, well, how do they get away with that, and how can we put that genie back into the bottle? Because again, I until we go back to Tesla's way of transmitting electricity through the air, unless we want to electrocute elephants or rhinos as we do now with the electricity we transmit through the air, what are we? How can they get away with that? What kind of loopholes need to be closed so that Dominion or Appalachian Power, can not get extracurriculatory on this?
Well, for one, let's talk about a perfectly neutral. I'll call it a loophole, but really it's a failing of our system. We have this capacity contract. It's for the right to move fuel that a utility is buying. So it isn't the fuel itself, it's the right to move fuel. But it's huge. It's a $2.5 billion commitment over 20 years. And the SEC has already had 2 attempts to have rulings on this that they've turned back and said, no, this is a fuel factor case and you can't decide those until the costs are incurred and the utility comes in to recover the costs. Well, that's an enormous cost. I mean, to look at on the backside instead of the front side. Mm-hmm. And really, long term, I think our system needs to move to be fairer, not just to ratepayers, but also to accommodate Dominion and APCO's planning. This should be done on the front side. Anything of this size that commits this much money should be done and decided before moving ahead. There are other states that do it that way, but Virginia is not one of them. So that is a failing of our system that's been revealed in this whole process.
Well, and we see it frequently in the newspaper when they go and they say, "Oh yeah, we overcharged everyone by this much, and here you're going to get your rebate."
Here's your bill.
Yeah, and there's usually an argument of saying that's it, that's all you, and this sort of shrug that you get from the electric utilities. I know I tilt at windmills sometimes, Ken, and you get bemused by it, but is there any way we can get our electric distribution system, deregulated the way we did the telephone distribution system?
That system has existed in Texas for almost 20 years, where it isn't no regulated monopoly, but they have shrunk the regulated monopoly to the wires. And every single customer can pick their power provider.
So it is. So they basically did what they did with Ma Bell. They said, okay, we're going to give you a little kickback for having built the infrastructure, but it's not yours anymore. You have to share it.
Well, the better way to do it, I think, would simply be to force Dominion to spin off the wires and transmission. Yeah. So the way it would actually happen is all their shareholders would get another share of stock, for the ownership of that company, which would then have a separate independent board of directors with no relationship to the Dominion company. They could sell it off to others not participating in the Virginia market, but you get the idea. And they've done this before. When Dominion merged with Consolidated Natural Gas, which is in western Pennsylvania and eastern Ohio, they had to spin off Virginia Natural Gas. And I know that because I was one of the lawyers on the one of the due diligence teams in the auction for Virginia Natural Gas. So I know more than anybody would ever want to know about Virginia Natural Gas. But Atlanta Gas Light won that auction. They bought Virginia Natural Gas. My recollection is for $490 million. And Dominion proceeded with their merger, not a merger of equals. Dominion really took over Consolidated Natural Gas. And but that was determined to be necessary in the marketplace. And so my point in pointing out that example is it is not at all uncommon, including in other states, but we have the experience here in Virginia not too long ago, where our regulated utilities have to spin off elements to stay in compliance with Virginia law. Because remember, they're not free market competitors.
Right, exactly. I can't say, you know what, I don't like Dominion, I want to use Central Virginia Electric Cooperative or somebody like that.
Right.
And that's the shame of it, is I'd like to be able to, if not get to Tesla's model where you're just shooting electricity through the air to a receiver in your car or your home, which is heresy. Nobody could ever do that. At least allow the wires that are bringing the service to my home to be, open to whoever wants to send me the juice.
Right.
And then you get like a cable box. You ostensibly, I imagine, you get something like the cable box, and it's all right. This is your Central Virginia box, and it decodes what you're getting, and it'll create the bill from it. But at least then, Dominion would have to compete, with people somewhere anyway.
Yeah, that box you mentioned is probably something like a smart meter, and smart meters as their own topic are very controversial.
Oh yeah.
But when you make them an element of choice on the part of the customer, they lose all of their controversy. I mean, because the customer's in total control. Exactly. They can have one or not have one. They can just, plug and chug with something simple, or they can do something more dynamic that does require a more intelligent connection to the system. So, that's the future of energy delivery. You're going to see more microgrids. You're going to see a lot more local production. Right now, we see it mostly in the form of peaking plants for natural gas, but it's also how you'll see solar used in small doses locally. Right now, there are a lot of people on the left who've suddenly figured out that regulation is a bad thing for people who want to enter a market. I love talking to them for the first time about barriers to market entry because they've never thought about it nor cared before. Well, all of a sudden, they care about it, and so it may be that there are free market alliances to be had in the energy space coming your way.
You mean there are people out there that don't think Adam Smith was the quarterback for the Redskins for half the season? That's great. I'm happy to hear that.
The real Adam Smith had worse than a broken ankle over the course of time in this country. But we'll wait till his cousin Alex gets better.
But my point being is that the marketplace, it always fascinates me. The same folks who are against Dominion being this big dominator of the Virginia General Assembly, especially the folks who want to go after their contributions to political campaigns and things like that, are the same ones who seem to want to create a Virginia Directorate of Broadband Service under sort of the same model as the way Dominion distributes electricity.
And I tell those folks who want to deny them, First Amendment rights in the political arena, why don't you just make it not worth it to them? Yeah. Take away the power of the regulations. Take away the power of the monopoly. Then the First Amendment will take care of itself. Truth is the best spotlight. And, you and I are practicing that First Amendment right now. But in a state with no limits, Dominion's money makes it the 800-pound gorilla in the General Assembly on a bipartisan basis, and they use that influence to move money, legalize stealing, as far as I'm concerned, because the General Assembly legalizes it, from ratepayers to Dominion shareholders. And they do it without benefit to us.
Right,
and that's
because
wrong.
Yeah, who's
wrong.
Who's
and
our
it's
lobbyist?
one of the things that always happens when you have monopoly capture of government.
And that's where I find, this story really takes a fascinating turn, because it really puts us in. I did not know that about Texas. I'm going to look more into it, because it may be one of those things that the listeners are going to roll their eyes every time I bring it up. But thank you for telling me about it, Ken.
So I'll warn them now. They'll be hearing about ERCOT.
ERCOT.
And it's not Epcot. It's ERCOT. ERCOT is their covers almost the whole state except a little bit of the northern handle there. And it is the biggest free market in electricity in America, and I presume, therefore, the world.
Wow.
So, and it has worked for nearly 20 years. People in Virginia, like, my friend Frank Wagner would say, well, we tried that in Virginia. It didn't work. No, we didn't come anywhere near trying it.
But that's what they love to do.
Anywhere near an actual separate operator of the wires where customers could actually buy electricity from wherever they wanted to, with the risk of the market all in there too.
Well, it's the same thing. I think you and I had that very conversation about school choice in Virginia too. As we wrap up National School Choice Week, they make something that isn't close to school choice, and then say we tried it, nobody liked it. So,
right.
It's the Virginia way, I think, is what Governor Northam mentioned. Ken, thank you so much. Where should they go? freedomworks.org to find your writings on this. We'll share them all as well. We deeply appreciate everything you do, and sometimes it makes me wonder if we're not better off having you doing these kind of things than we would have had you actually been governor for 4 years. Which I
hope your listeners will help Delegate Lee Ware by calling their delegates and supporting HB 1718. Lee is doing yeoman's work here, fighting the David and Goliath fight, and I know the Virginia Tea Party Federation is supporting him as well as Freedom Works, but we need everybody calling their legislators to help push this forward.
Thank you, Ken. I appreciate it as always, and we'll touch base again very soon. Ken Cuccinelli, Director of Regulatory Action Center at Freedom Works. This week on Freedom and Prosperity Radio. Have a great day, sir.
You do the same.
Latest from inside the swamp with 5th District Congressman Denver Riggleman. How are you doing this morning, Denver?
I'm doing okay. Just in district and happy to be home, but wish I was working back in D.C. right now.
I'm tracking you here. You've been in office like 3 weeks, and it's gone from doing great, doing wonderful, to doing okay. I mean, we got to keep you enthused. Are you getting enough vitamin C? Come on,
I am. My multivitamins are working. I'm keeping chipper.
Okay, all right. As long as that's the only kind of chipper involved. So, what is the latest? The vote yesterday in the Senate bills. Mark Warner, Tim Kaine, both voted against any sort of compromise there. So, outside of holding a press conference at Reagan Airport, which I found interesting, it seems like Tim Kaine has done more joint appearances with Mark Warner than he did with Hillary Clinton. What is Batman and Robin saying about their Senate representation, and what's next then, Denver?
Well, I talked about the Virginia delegation last week, right? And then all of us meet together once a month, and Mark Warner and Tim Kaine are perfectly pleasant in person, good people, to talk to, very, very respectful, and absolutely know nothing about border security or how things actually work. And I think they might know it in a political way, but I think when you see people get excited about not funding workers, or, there's been not one Republican who does a fist pump on the floor. We're actually looking around, with sort of in awe at the ability of the Democrats to not debate us. They are so terrified of actually joining us in real debate, and that's why they use hyperbole and emotion. And when you fight something like that, it gets very difficult, and especially if you're, sort of a common sense guy. And I don't know how long you have today, but I can piss off everybody today if you'd like me to.
I'm here for that.
Every side of the spectrum. So
that's our programming philosophy.
You have those on the far right, very far right, and some spectrums of people I like. they're going, well, we're not going to vote for anything, even if there is, even if we do come to a border wall, I think because there's too much money in the budget for the border wall and other things, and they're bragging that there's just way too much money in the budget anyway. And here's my thing on both sides of this. Number one, border security actually saves the American taxpayer money on a massive level. But even more importantly, it saves lives. Number two, if you're not seeing this from a solution-based perspective and it's only ideological, you're not doing a service to the American people. And now you see nine freshman Democratic veterans, either armed services or in the CIA or in other federal agencies, that are now starting to say this is ridiculous. And I think next week you're going to see something come out in a bipartisan way from a lot of veterans and a lot of people who actually know that security works. I think that might happen. I can't tell you exactly when or where my sourcing is, since it might be me that's part of that. But it's going to be an interesting week. I can tell you that.
Save that clip. Well, we played a clip because there was a letter that was sent to Speaker Pelosi by a bunch of Democrats freshmen that said, "Here, give the president these landmarks. Let's give him this. Give him some money. Give a guaranteed schedule and everything." And apparently, Congressperson Luria of the first district was one of them. Now, that doesn't necessarily surprise me. You're representing a port that would get some upgrades, especially as it comes to, the drug trade and security there in Hampton Roads. So, I could claim self-interest. But isn't the point of the thing, you're supposed to be there voting on things that are going to either stop something from hurting us or create a scenario where we can help ourselves, Denver?
Yes, and I think the hypocrisy, gosh, Joe, very good question, very good statement, because right now, the reason I did the Facebook Live and the reason you're seeing a lot of frustration is the Republicans, we are pretty common sense on this at this point. We voted, you've heard of motions to recommit, right, to recommit it to committee for debate, which they just do not want to do. There's not a Democrat who wants to go against me on the floor. I can tell you that right now on this. So I would wipe them off the floor because with discipline and kindness,
sure,
right?
Yep.
Yeah, but not nothing physical. Of course, somebody might take that. Who knows? But I'm trying to say, but intellectually.
But Denver, these are people who 5 years ago were saying we need a wall. I've got Barack Obama and Bill Clinton in State of the Union addresses. So let's not even open that can of worms, talking about illegal aliens and how that has to be addressed. I've got Chuck Schumer saying I'll give you $26 billion for border security and a wall, and it's just. Multifaceted is the only word I can come up with, because two faces just aren't enough for these people.
Well, and you know what, though? The Democrats have done a great job in appealing to emotion. They've done a great job on that. And that's there's somebody who said, I think it was Steve Scalise, who said this, and he goes, the Democrats are a lot better, at telling a lie than the Republicans are at telling the truth.
Yeah, he's right there.
I think it was something like that. But, we had two motions to recommit where we tried to open the government last week to pay all workers through January 15th and some workers through January 24th this week. Democrats voted against those bills. So you don't see that report in the press. So here's the issue, and now I'm starting to see it. The press is a clickbait thing on a lot of issues. They don't want to report the truth exactly because it actually gives a balanced view of this debate. And I think me going into politics, because of the 4 years that I tried to fight by myself, I saw that, and I thought I could change things. But we are almost in a current that I can't get out of. And you see a lot of the freshman Republicans and the sophomore Republicans and a lot of the guys who know national security are very frustrated. I'm telling you this. It looks like in the press that we're just getting steamrolled. There are moderate Democrats that come from conservative districts that have had enough. And I think next week you're going to see some cracks. I'm just letting you know.
All right. Well, I hang on to that, on that dangling participle. Denver, can I hang on to you the other side of the break? All right. I appreciate it. All right. Grammatically incorrect, but you count on me for nothing less this morning. We'll come right back. Denver Riggleman, 5th District Congressperson on representation. There's so much more to get into in this shutdown, but there's even more going on than beyond that. Visiting with 5th District Congressman Denver Riggleman, and we were talking about shutdown mania and how the media in clickbait, when we left off, Denver, I don't know which is more infuriating, the fact that Tim Kaine, Mark Warner out there talking about the FAA and the TSA and the Coast Guard and all these folks who aren't being paid, or that they've been in the Senate for all these years and allowed a list of non-essential personnel to include the Coast Guard and FAA employees and things like that. When all this is said and done, can somebody sit down and come up with a better list of what is essential and non-essential? And I'm not talking about Mark Warner's Stupid Act, which is actually what he calls it, or Stop the Stupid Act. But come up with a better list as to what really is a non-essential employee.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the fact that you have some of these that are classified as non-essential is a bit concerning, right? A little bit head-scratching, and I think we can come up with a better list, but a lot of that's been politics too, and I think, again, somebody like me, Joe, who comes in from the outside, like life experience, and you run companies, and you have to sign the front of the check, and you have to see what the best things are. You're just looking at this. You're looking at the failures of the past that are starting to bubble up, and you're saying that, when politicians just make decisions to further their own agendas and they forget that they serve the people, this stuff happens. And I think, and looking at this, I don't want to get caught up in that. But you know what? Guess what? I have to vote one way or the other based on not only my belief systems, but actually in what the 5th District wants. And it really is something when you actually get into this, how difficult this job is to serve this many people with this many differing perspectives and to try to stay on the freedom side of things and on the common sense side of things, knowing you're going to get hurt. You're going to get your face ripped off by people. And at some point, we have to have people who want to actually go in and do things and not this sort of, it is almost as if everybody is drinking their own bathwater and getting drunk on it. And I'm trying to be different than that and different than those type of people.
I'm trying to shake that visual of never mind of drinking my own bathwater. Because something happened earlier this week. We interviewed Ken Cuccinelli from FreedomWorks, of course, former Attorney General, state senator. We were talking about Dominion and deregulating the electric industry, and I got a bunch of emails saying, "Well, you're just helping the Sierra Club beat the Atlantic Coast Pipeline," and even actually addressed it during the interview that we don't want the Atlantic Coast Pipeline to not happen. We want it to happen the right way and the constitutional way. But in this binary world where it's either you're with us or you're against us, I don't know how anything is ever going to get done, which conceptually could be okay. But I mean, there's things like paying the soldiers and the Coast Guard that need to happen.
It does. And that's funny. My thoughts on deregulation. I'm an anti-monopoly, antitrust guy. Not just, deregulation of the energy industry, but a shout out to my wife today who's fighting ABC, another monopoly. She's in the State House testifying today about how ABC tries to destroy small businesses. And so if anybody wants to argue deregulation in the energy industry or what monopolies and trusts can do to just normal citizens like myself, I'm happy to have that argument. And also with anyone, anytime. And you're right, too, is that why, so our MTR that we voted on the last 2 weeks, just to let you know, would have paid the Coast Guard. Would have done that. Democrats voted against it. So that's not being reported because their motions to recommit, and they're not as sexy as the full appropriations bills. And I think what you have is, again, you have a press that just doesn't want to give both sides. And like we were talking about earlier, this is a far-left press that thinks they're reporting the truth, maybe. I'm trying to give them some credit, but they just can't seem to get their arms around what truth actually is, and I'm going to keep fighting for that. And if people are against deregulation or they're against voting in a common-sense way, then I want to tell you this, Joe, then don't vote for me and don't vote for people like me. Keep voting a binary way. Actually look into the facts of what's going on, do some research, and don't count on just a headline on MSNBC to be the driver of your intellectual curiosity.
No, if nothing else, I agree. And I've lived with these people. I work with these people every day for 30 years. I've seen a lot of media people that aren't exactly the deepest puddle, if you know what I mean.
Oh, wow.
But what comes next then? What is going to happen in the next week, Denver, regarding the shutdown, but even, substantive things, things we're not covering, like this New York State state law, which obviously is like abortion on demand, we lose the discussion of the March for Life because of Chief Staring Bull and all these, things that the media is distracting us from. I want to know what's coming next. Are we going to get the government back in line and then start trying to work on a conservative solution to some of these problems?
I mean, I hope so. Yeah. I mean, what happened, with the Catholic kids was an absolute travesty. Then you have this guy being interviewed who has such a problem with the truth. I don't know if he even can tell you the truth about how old he is, right? He just doesn't want to tell the truth. Yeah. And that issue, New York. I was just talking about that with my daughter this morning. Just abhorrent. And that's being ignored. You know that all of this is being ignored based on the shutdown, based on Russia talk, based on all these other things that are coming out. And
now we got Roger Stone and
Roger Stone, all this ridiculous tripe. Instead of actually governing, actually legislating, actually making tough decisions. And I think what you have is you got a D plus 37 district in San Francisco running the show, and that's Nancy Pelosi. You have people who think they can't be beat, like the Tim Kaines and Mark Warners in Virginia now, because we've gone so blue. And these people think they're completely safe and can just say anything on an emotional level, and nobody's going to call them out. And I got to tell you, Joe, it scares the heck out of me, but I'm going to continue to do the best I can. And if people, again, if they want to listen and have a respectful conversation with me, I'm happy to do it. But if you get crazy or you get too emotional or too much hyperbole, I'm going to let you know exactly what I think.
So is there going to be a vote next week, or is there any proposal or any kind of meetings on this?
Yes, there will be. There's going to be there's some back and forth already on legislation that makes sure or tries to help the government not shutting down again on a basis of something like this. I think you're going to see something come out of the president. The rumblings are happening with declaring a national emergency. We have all this happening, Joe. And so next week's going to be just tune in. It's going to be exciting. So tune in.
We will. We'll stay tuned, Denver. I've got you on speed dial. Thank you for everything you do. It's Rep. Riggleman on Twitter. The congressional link will be on the podcast of this later on today. Thank you, sir, for everything you do. Russ just emailed, said, great interview with our congressman, and Russ generally is not very kind to our congressman, so you've won a tough audience there in Russ.
Well, thank you, Russ.
And thank you, sir. We'll talk to you again next week.
Thank you, buddy.
Next on Freedom and Prosperity Radio, we're going to visit with Horace Cooper as we watch the legal profession come after your pocketbook some more. But for context, let's start off with a little bit of next week's guest, Chris Horner, explaining how private lawyers are now inhabiting our governor's and our attorney general's offices.
So what they did is, it begins with a May 5th through 9th, 2017 email thread, and in which governor's staff of those three states, senior governor's staff, okay, we've got one who made national news a few years ago when he was run out of the Oregon governor's office for a green job scandal.
Yeah.
He's now with Jerry Brown, and he sent some very helpful PowerPoints that are also in the report and budget documents, calling for $50 million a year in off-books staff and consultants for governors only, for climate only. And the reason was, the foundations are spending over $1 billion per year on climate, he said, after he wrote, before you gasp at my ask for $50 million a year.
Understand? Oh, man.
Yeah. So then they said, Governor Brown's staff wrote, it can't always be us staff performing the work of staff. Now, I believe it's supposed to be. Someone might check. In Virginia, it certainly is supposed to be by statute. But
and thus an idea was born.
Yes, it was, I'm really busy. And then they said in the thread, or wrote, there's a plethora of funder interest in the governors ramping up their climate advocacy.
And the bells begin to ring.
Therefore, they've got a lot of money to spend. Our taste is reasonably $50 million a year. I'm really busy. I'd rather be less busy. So they set up they had a beauty contest for nonprofit groups to interview to serve as the cutout. And it's all laid out there in all of its glory and draft agreements and so on. The U.S. Climate Alliance is an independent project of blank.
Our own Mark Herring is saying that a JLARC investigation into this is politically motivated. Now, Horace Cooper visits with us. Tell us a little bit about some of these lawsuits that are driving up our electric costs. Horace, I was reading a piece by Horace Cooper based on some lawsuits being filed in Louisiana, and it brings it all home about how these lawsuits really are hurting all of us at a local level. And I wanted to reach out to Horace. He's one of the great legal minds of our time. Horace Cooper, thanks again for taking some time out with us this morning. How are you doing, sir?
It's great to be on the program. Looking at the temperature gauge, I think I could use just a little bit of global warming, or at least some local warming.
Well, they're at the National Center for Public Policy Research and Real Clear Energy. Talk about this, because we also have a story kind of running in parallel to it. Our Attorney General apparently has all these free, quote-unquote, staff members working on climate cases paid for by Tom Steyer and Michael Bloomberg out of the goodness of their heart. We just want to help you out and give you some staff. So not only is it a matter of people coming after and targeting local energy business, but it's also our own government being weaponized against us.
Well, absolutely. One of the things that economists say has led to the dramatic increase in the economic output of the United States of America over the last couple of years has been our energy industry, and how effectively it's been able to help us have access to the kind of steady and useful and reliable energy that we need. It is a height of irony that throughout the state of Virginia, we are seeing the kinds of drops in the price for energy access, particularly when we're talking about putting gasoline in your car. You're now seeing a statewide average that has just dipped below $2 a gallon.
Oh, I know.
And in some places, it's gotten down, because I was just getting gas last week. It was $1.79 a gallon.
Oh, where? I got to go fill up.
Well, just right down off of 95 near Woodbridge.
Oh,
and
man.
It is amazing. It is amazing what we're able to see and what that really means. It isn't just it's great to see that price. It means that there's more money to put in your pocket to use for other things. But the trial bar has decided, wait a second, now is a good time for us to jump in and tap into this bounty. Rather than you and I and your listeners being able to see more resources stay in our own pockets, they like to put some of that in theirs, and they've come up with this phony idea, particularly in the context of the article I wrote about, that in Louisiana, coastal erosion is caused not by the natural processes that have occurred over hundreds and hundreds of years, not by hurricanes that have been particularly pernicious in that particular area, but instead by the very energy companies that the state of Louisiana and local parishes encouraged to come to those communities to explore. Now it's a multi-billion-dollar enterprise supporting a workforce, supporting schools, supporting all of the kinds of livelihoods that many, many Americans, both in Louisiana and out, depend upon. They're suing them, and if they get their jackpot, what is likely to happen is that we'll immediately start seeing the change, either a move from those jurisdictions altogether or spikes in the prices that they're going to charge, because those costs will have to be borne by us, not by the trial lawyers who are making these phony claims.
I want to bring this back because those cases in Louisiana are being thrown into my inbox by advocacy groups who want to fight offshore exploration here in Virginia, saying, look at what's happening in Louisiana, and it isn't happening from that. I remember the worst case of coastal erosion had nothing to do with oil. It had to do with some jetties that were built off the Brooklyn coast to protect Coney Island and wound up devastating the Quag beaches on eastern Long Island because of the natural flow of the sands. I love it when man seems to think, especially when lawyers are involved, they're smarter than nature, Horace.
Oh, no, absolutely. And just as in California and just as in New York, also in Louisiana, we've seen this phenomenon where the trial lawyers come into federal court. In the case of Louisiana, they've gotten a little slicker and they're going into state court, but they're making these wild claims about what energy exploration has done that's been harmful. Meanwhile, the governments, the local jurisdictions, that's those parishes, and in California and in New York, it's city governments, they go into the bond market and they say, hey, come invest here. It's great. We see a outlook long-term of a great return on your investment. Now is the time to make this opportunity for you to get a big return. Here's the case. It's the left hand not knowing what the far left hand is up to. They tell the bond market one thing, and they tell the courts another thing. We're having to call them out on this.
Well, I'm glad you are, Horace. I'm going to post a link to it at Real Clear Energy. Thank you for all of your work. You're one of the great legal minds. I hope to see you up at CPAC if you're up there at the end of February, and we'll catch up then as well. Thank you for your time this morning and more importantly, your research and your work. Thank you for listening. For all of us here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy, my name is Joe Thomas. Till next week, so long, and thanks for all the fish.